name's Paul Holbrook and I created the Diary Detox, and today I'm going to talk to you about how you can help your people manage their day when working remotely. Now, the answer I have to give you is very short and very simple. Help your people to spend less time working. Yeah, I know, it wasn't quite what you're expecting, but bear with me and I'll explain why. If you think about what happened when we went into lockdown, if you were like me, you became super productive almost overnight, and it's no surprise. You probably got up at the same time, but of course that commute was now a walk somewhere in the house, so you probably spent that extra time working. And exactly the same thing happened at the other end of the day, so we got lots more done. Now this all worked very well for the first 4 weeks. I, at the end of my working day, would go and walk my dog, I'd get some exercise, have dinner, relax with the family, and then go to bed before starting the same thing the next day. But in week 5, something started to happen. I stopped exercising. It's like I was getting to the end of my day and I was just too shattered, and it was all I could do to have a glass of wine and TV before I went to bed. Now the next week, I started to finish work early. Started at 4:30. I was too tired to continue, like I was running out of battery, and this got earlier and earlier as the week went on, until eventually I had to take a day off midweek. Now if you know me personally, you'll know this is virtually unheard of for me, but I didn't have any energy at all. Now I spoke to my wife and she said, well, it's hardly surprising. You're going into the office early, you're coming out relatively late, and other than that 15 minutes where you have some lunch, we don't really see anything of you. Are you sure you're not being burnt out? And you know what? I was. Now something had to change. I didn't know what, but I was willing to experiment, but I wanted to know why it was happening first of all. So I decided to think back to what was happening before lockdown. Now the only difference in my day back then was that I was commuting, I was walking between the meetings that I was going to, I may have met people in a coffee shop or a water cooler for a conversation, and I was interrupted more because people had access to me. Now I was still out of the house the same amount of time, but I wasn't getting burnt out. So what was really going on? Well, I realised that although it didn't look like it, beforehand I was getting plenty of rest, natural lulls in the day when I was having that walk to meeting or when I was being interrupted. Now I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that means we should go back to the office. If anything, we were getting too much rest, too many interruptions and too many walks to too many meetings, but there must have been a happy medium. Now I thought the answer lay in Parkinson's law. Now if you search this on Google, it'll say that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. And that's what was happening. We were spending lots of time out of the house and we were allowing those lulls in the day, that rest, to expand into that. So basically work, therefore, was expanding to fill the time we were giving it, and we were living in between the gaps when we weren't working. Now I decided to create a corollary to Parkinson's law. Reduce the time available for work so as to expedite its completion. Now, of course, there's a lower bound to this. You can't take a 1-hour task, give it 5 minutes and expect it to take 5 minutes. But there must have been a happy medium. So I decided to create something called the Foundation Week. Now, this is it. It's full of blue time, as I call it, living, and that's why I'm wearing a blue t-shirt today. It had the space for me to have my shower and breakfast in the morning, a mid-morning break where I not only made a cup of coffee but actually sat down and drank it. I had a lunch break in the middle of the day, but I also put my exercise there as well, followed by a break in the afternoon, and then the end of my day was signified by walking my dog Loki for an hour, and that gave me permission to stop work. Now I knew that I had the chance of changing this if it didn't work, but it did work. I got exactly the same amount of done, if not more, in less time. Because I was giving myself limited gaps to work, I was more focused during those periods. And that midday break when I had lunch and went for my exercise actually gave me more energy in the afternoon. So, my advice to you is the best thing you can do if you want to help your people manage their day when working remotely, or more generally flexibly, or even not working flexibly at all, just working the way you used to, help your people spend less time working. Thanks a lot.
everyone, and welcome to Flexpo Business. Today we're going to be talking about people, and obviously after the pandemic that we've just been through and still going through, it's so important now for us how we really look at the future of our people and how we're going to recruit and retain people within our organisations. So we've got a brilliant lineup today of panelists. they're going to introduce themselves to you all. So first off, I've got Chloe. So Chloe, you could introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about you. That'd be great.
Hi, I'm Chloe. I'm the HR director at Semafone. I've come from quite a large background in recruiting, retaining, and trying to align businesses with people processes. My mantra is not everyone has to hate their job. It seems a revolutionary concept. But yeah, I'm just here to hopefully gain some insight and give some insight.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chloe. And next on my screen is Tom. So Tom, can you introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Tom Holmwood, the Recruitment and Resourcing Manager for Surrey County Council. I've been with Surrey County Council for 11 years, started in agency recruitment and made the switch to internal recruitment and worked my way up from administrator to manager. My team, or our team rather, look after 2,500 to 3,000 hires a year for Surrey County Council. And again, as Chloe just said, hopefully I will be able to offer some input and helpful words of wisdom to flexible working and what my observations have been from council's perspective.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Tom. And next is Dan.
Hi, yes, so I'm Dan. I've got two hats. So I head up digital and platform delivery at Barclays, and I also last year started Career Dad, which was all about trying to say to predominantly dads that you can focus on your career and still be an active present father at the same time, and just try and help more guys to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dan. And finally, we've got Catherine.
Hi everybody, I'm Catherine Murphy, and my role at PwC is the Flexible Talent Network Lead, which doesn't generally mean anything because we all like these long titles. So basically what that means is I look after a program that specifically looks at how we can bring in people to PwC on a flexible basis. So whether that be annualized days contracts, turn time only, etc. And the other role that I had, which is key for this conversation, is during the pandemic, I was part of the project team that was looking at transforming the process as to how we recruit people, how we onboard them, etc. So hopefully some of the insights will help people today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I have got a few questions for all of you. So first one is, the pandemic has brought into focus clear demand from people wanting to continue to bring their whole selves to work. Organisations that are aligned with their values and feel like their employer genuinely cares about them. How important is it to review and restructure your business and the people in it as an organisation's response to such massive, continuous and rapid evolving change? Where do you start? So Chloe, I think you wanted to come, you had an opinion on this?
Yeah, I think, we've been very fortunate because we work in the tech sphere. So we've always had paperless recruitment, paperless onboarding, all of those elements. But ultimately what we did was there was a couple of things that really triggered our response. The first one was me being on a Zoom call with my boss who's over in the States, and my 2-year-old son walking in and having a massive tantrum, and I just had to leave the call and say, look, I need to come back to you, give me 5 minutes. And I remember being absolutely mortified, and basically what I kind of emailed him afterwards and said, look, I'm really sorry that this has had to happen, but I've now got him at home. And he came back to me and he said, if your son thinks that's a tantrum boy, you haven't met my kids. And it was one of those things where you realize that the world of work was changing. So first of all, we restructured our business very, very early on. As soon as we saw this coming, we actually restructured. We had to downsize the business, and that was incredibly difficult. But the message from us is we're making these changes now so that we do not need to make any of these changes later. Nobody took a pay cut. We only had one person furloughed, and we just basically said, by doing these changes, we're able to look after every single person that's still with us, and we know what we're doing. So we kind of had that message of strength initially. The other things that we've done is basically every single meeting that you do needs to be by video. And if you have your kids with you, they are more than welcome to be bouncing on your knee, sitting next to you, any of those things. We have a Teams channel that's called Semafone Kids, where people share resources and elements so that parents don't feel that they're the only one going through what they're going through. We communicate, so we do business information, we do quarterly business reviews, and people are on video, it's live, and we've had exec question and answer sessions so that everything we do is very, very candid. You can submit questions anonymously, and so that we can come back to you live on air. And what it's done is just promoted this culture of open conversation around where we are, where the business is, and where we're going from here. And on top of all of that is we're very clear about people and their roles. So quite simply, you know, if you're not doing your job, we will hold you accountable. It's not that somebody else is just going to inherit your job after that. And because people know that, they have that trust built in that they can speak to people and not feel as though they're going to be penalized for what they're saying, that if their kids are playing up, it's not this big deal, because everyone's there to do a job, whatever that looks like.
Mm. And Catherine, you thought
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that Chloe said. And the only thing that I would add to that is I think that actually the pandemic was an opportunity for organisations to really prove that they mean what their values state. And every organisation has their values, and it's put on their website, and every organisation has to have their purpose statement, etc. Whereas I think this actually, when it crunch comes to crunch kind of thing, it actually gives you that opportunity to prove it. And one of the things that PwC did was it was recognised how difficult it was for parents very early on. So we are a professional services firm. We have to account for every 6 minutes of our time, everybody, whether you are client facing or not. And for some people that was physically impossible when you do have a child bouncing on your lap. And one of the first things that leadership said was that they were introducing a code. So a timesheet code to allow parents to say if they were only able to work for 4 hours of the day and the other 3.5 or 4 hours they were needing to look after childcare, you just put it down on that code and you didn't need to worry about it. And I think messages like that from the very beginning prove that value of care, or whatever your own organisation's value is, that they will stand by them. And it immediately alleviated so many worries for parents. So I think I totally agree with what you were saying, Chloe, that when it hits you personally, it means a lot.
Yeah, but of course it does. And we found for so many people that it was that sigh of relief of actually even further down the pandemic, you know, not just when it all started and, oh gosh, you know, little Johnny's all of a sudden at home, but actually further down the line when, you know, nurseries reopened, we sent out a big message to parents saying, you know, whatever you choose to do, this is a non-judgmental place, and if you feel any of that, then you need to come and tell us. And just that consistent messaging has helped, I think.
And Tom, your Surrey Council was the same, was it?
I agree with everything that has just been said there, and I think Chloe sort of mentioned something that's rung true with us as well, which was we were, you know, it's about, we talked a good game, and there was an opportunity to see if we walked, and we evidenced what we were saying, and I'm very pleased to say that was absolutely the case. You know, even from personal direct experience, I think people in our team in recruitment were terribly worried about how they would manage, and actually what made my heart melt in some cases was people's commitment to wanting to do a good job. And it wasn't, you know, I didn't have one conversation with anyone who said, sorry, Tom, can't do that. You know, I'm looking after my kids. It was more like, look, this is how I'm going to do my work and manage my personal life. And I would probably suggest, although it's anecdotal, that in some cases where we allowed people to work much more flexibly than we'd ever thought about in the past. I'm talking about working on weekends, where, you know, the council, it's 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. That's what we do, you know. But now we've got people picking up things on the weekend. We're having calls in the evening with people. And actually, I think that, like I said, it's anecdotal, but I would suggest that I've received more work in some cases from people who we've given that flexibility than normally I'd expect from them. You know, because people are loyal, people are willing to sort of give back where they've been, you know, allowed freedom and space to operate. And I think, you know, this is a massive opportunity to create real loyalty with individuals as well. So it's not only about sort of evidencing what that we're going to do what we say, and we believe in what we say, but it's also about it's an opportunity to create a real sort of brand loyalty as well. I mean, I think we've probably all seen examples of where organisations have been awful with people, and we all can recognise where there's certain companies in the market who've been absolutely superb and rightly held up on a pedestal for it. So I agree with everything that's been said.
Okay, well, I mean, this probably goes on to one of my other questions, and how are you keeping your people connected and keeping engagement and productivity high? Is this sustainable in the long term, and what are your plans moving forward?
Was that for me, that one? Yeah. Well, I think I mean I'll speak from experience. I mean the recruitment team that I have the pleasure of looking after is split into sort of advisory in terms of advertising and getting adverts out there and finding the right people, and then administrative in terms of managing the process of people joining the council. And I think the advisory world is incredibly project based, and actually that was relatively straightforward to move straight over to a virtual world, because a large part of it was work coming through our e-recruitment system, adverts being vetted, then pushed out, and that can all be done at home. And then we've got the administrative side of my team's work, and we were coming from a place where we'd had those 6-7 individuals in an office. We had we had a board on the wall that looked at the work that was coming in, the work that was completed, and the work going out. And at first it was a little bit scary, because the council made quite a quick decision after well, I suppose it had to make quite a quick decision. And with it, one day we were kind of all in the office, the next day we were all at home, and the managers, the other managers in my team and I started getting a little bit nervous about how we were going to move what was quite a transactional process over to a virtual world. And we'd already made the shift towards being paper-based, even though we always were a council, we love our printers. But actually, what we did is it pushed us to quickly finalise making the last parts of the process paperless, which went really quickly. But from a productivity point of view, it was relatively straightforward, because what we did is we just now have a virtual board. So we just copied the board that was originally on the wall, and we all gathered round in the morning to fill out with the figures and have a look at how we were doing. And we just moved it online virtually. And then what we've done is just used, a lot of people like me who probably wouldn't have heard of Teams or been aware of it, 9 months ago, but now it's become part and parcel of the technology that we use to help us manage productivity and workloads and things like that. So quite simply, what we've done now is we just have a situation where every morning at 10 o'clock, whoever's around jumps on a quick call, which lasts about 10 minutes, where we update the board as a team. We have a quick chat about anything that we need to, and then the team are given their tasks and go off to do that. So that is certainly something that's going to stay in place forever now, irrespective of what happens with regards to us working in the office, because it works so brilliantly. And it sounds really simple, and it is, but actually what it did is it gave us the confidence that we could still, as managers, have oversight of what work was coming into the team, and obviously to ensure that it was being done. Now, the team have been absolutely superb. We had probably gone a little bit too far with our micromanagement, if I'm honest, at the start, where we actually asked the team in a Teams chat to actually let us know every time they did a piece of work. Now, that does sound incredibly, very, very much micromanagement. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that it was fair in terms of making sure that we could have some oversight on who was doing what. And actually, we quickly realised that everyone was working so brilliantly that we really didn't need to do that. But the funny thing was, the team opted to carry on doing that because they wanted to. So from their point of view, they were saying it's lovely to see the work just being knocked off that we needed to do every day. I think it gave each of them confidence, if you like, that they could see other people were doing as much as they were, and the work was being done. So they've opted just to keep that off their own back, which is absolutely fine. And I suppose to a degree, whereas when you're in an office and you can see and hear people doing bits and pieces, now they just do it online in terms of talking to each other and telling each other what they've done, etc. And I think you have to give people the opportunity as well to show what they're doing, etc., etc. So, and again, like I said earlier on, I think we're very much going to keep that way of working, because it affords us the opportunity to still keep oversight of what's going on. And, as managers, it's our responsibility to make sure that everyone's operating at a good level. It also helps us spot people who might be in trouble or need some help. If we don't see or hear from anyone in a while, we can actually dive in. And obviously, when you're in an office, you can do that a lot easier. But we have to sort of, I suppose, change and adjust to the new world of working. So I mean, that's a simple example, if you like, but it's just been so hugely effective. And I think, again, outside of that, it's been really helpful to keep the culture going. I mean, I'd like to think we had a great culture before we went into the lockdown, but actually, because everyone has to communicate quite regularly, it's forcing us still all to talk to each other and etc. It's hard for people to disappear, if that makes sense. And I think people, you know, we've been in this position for a long time. People want that. I think there's a balance to be struck between home working and office working. And we've gone from one extreme to the other. There's a happy medium, certainly. But I definitely think that actually the processes and structure that we've put in place now will certainly, we have no intentions of removing it. And it will allow us to manage flexible, agile working in the future much better, because we can say, well, we might be as a team meeting on this day, but don't worry if you can't make it, you can join us on the Teams call and we'll still do it that way.
Yeah.
If that sort of answers or gives you some insight into our approach to it.
Yeah, and I think you're just adapting all the time, aren't you? Everyone has to, and so it's quite hard to say, isn't it? I suppose what will it all look like in 6 months? But
you've got to be prepared to take a gamble, to make changes, to review it constantly. And I mean, I very much got the approach, and our managers have got the approach that actually we, in the main, let the team decide to a degree. So whenever we think of changing something or we want to review it, we just ask them. They make the decision. You know, how do you want to work? What works for you? At one point, we were having meetings in the morning and the afternoon. The team said, actually, we feel the afternoon one's not needed. We can do it this. No problem at all. No, you know, don't worry. And we've changed and adjusted and moved things around a bit. And no doubt over the next few months, we'll change things again. And I think it's also being open with the fact that we, as managers, as leaders, we don't always have the answers, and we are going to sometimes make mistakes, and that's okay as long as you're open with everyone and everyone's feeding into it. And I think, you know, there's certainly much more ownership when people are actually coming up with the ways they want to work. And like I said, you know, to a degree, but actually their voice is really important in this, because they're the ones doing, you know, working at the coalface.
Yeah, I think, and Tom, you kind of touched on culture. You know, that's obviously so important, isn't it, for
absolutely
recruiting? And I'd be interested to hear what anyone thinks about how you can give a true example of your culture within your businesses at the moment and how you're doing it, you know, virtually. Has anybody got any thoughts on how people, professionals, can make someone in, firstly, a good fit, secondly, bring them into a culture of and a family of a business without physically meeting them?
Yeah, can I chime in here really quick? Oh no, you go for it, Kat.
No,
I'll jump in after you.
It's all right.
Just a couple of really short points from us is that, you know, the job hasn't changed, the company hasn't changed, and it's not. The fact is all of this stuff, people working remotely. Why is this some kind of revolution? You know, ultimately, this should have been happening for years, and people that have been doing this for years, guess what? We went working from home overnight, and nobody batted an eyelid. Nobody. And there are so many businesses that have almost built it up in their minds to be this huge shift, and it isn't. The job hasn't changed, the company hasn't changed, the people that you have within that company are still the same people. Okay, so they interact over chat more. Doesn't everybody these days? I mean, I don't know about you, my 2-year-old knows how to work my phone better than I do, kind of thing. You know, let's not pretend that we're not all able to talk like this normally. So I don't need to be sitting next to you to make sure you're doing your work. And simply, you know, we've onboarded 6 people. We're a small company. We've got offices all over the world, but we've onboarded 6 people since lockdown, and they are performing really, really well because we were clear with them around what we expected, what they needed to do and when, and they met us halfway, because that's what an employment relationship is meeting people halfway. And people need to stop putting that barrier in front of them that it's going to somehow be different because they're seeing each other through the screen.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Chloe.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
Going from Lou's question on it in terms of, so how do you make sure that you're bringing the right people in from virtually when you're assessing them, and how do you make sure that they're then feeling brought in once you have onboarded them? And I think the key to both of those things is communication. And no one was denying that when we had that government announcement, it was really hard. No one knew what they were doing. So we had, at that point in time in March, we had 15,000 people in our recruitment pipelines. And the key thing that we decided to do was that we needed to communicate personally with all of them because they had so many questions. A lot of those people were coming from overseas. They didn't know if they would then be able to get visas, etc., etc. So the first step that we did was we communicated with every single one of those people and made sure that we were kept them up to speed. And then the next thing that we did to make sure that the rest of the process kept smooth was we then set up a mini team that I alluded to in part of my introduction as part of that project management piece, in terms of how we were going to transform that process to being virtual. So that involved linking in with all of the recruitment teams across all the different lines of service, linking in with IT, who are obviously then providing out laptops, linking in with legal, who are closely linked in with the Home Office to understand how we could virtually check people when they did come into work. And we would have daily conferences in the morning, sometimes as well as the evening, because things were changing so fast at that point of time to understand how we were going to react to this. And no one was, it was so hard because you would agree something in the morning, the government would then change its advice by the afternoon. And what you would have planned for, okay, we're going to have 3 sites that we're going to be able to bring people in at, that would have changed by the afternoon. So it then eventually all became virtual. So I think that communication with all elements of internally and externally was key for us. And then to sort of touch on the point of, okay, so how do we then make sure that people are the right fit, given that the only way that you're going to meet them now is through a call. So we've always used lots of tests, so like game-based assessments and psychological tests as well. They obviously help, but I think we've kind of used them more and used more of the kind of conversations in terms of interview structured conversations, and made people feel more relaxed through the interviews as well. And that has really helped in terms of making the business feel comfortable that they've got the right people, doing more technical styles of interviews as well. So whether it's case studies, etc., those can be done over video. And I think what the crux of it was there wasn't an option. There wasn't an option to go, okay, well, we will just meet in the office. And I was talking, I think it was Ursula, when we had a catch up last week, a lot of what we were doing was, because there were so many rules given by the government, it was, you can't do X, Y, and Z. And the list just kept going on in terms of what you couldn't do. So instead, we were very much focused on, well, what can we do to make sure that this still goes ahead? So it's a case of, we can't get people into the office to give them a laptop. How are we going to get a laptop to them? Okay, so we work through with IT to courier out laptops. So in the end, we were able to recruit circa around 200 people at the beginning of April.
Wow.
And that was converted from normally when we would bring people in and have an onboarding week, they would normally come in for, all of that was virtual. So that was linking in with the likes of L&D right from the very beginning of those project meetings. But then it was a case of, phew, we've done it, we've brought them in, right, we just need to roll this out every month. And then I think it comes back to that second point of the question, Lou, of how do you then make these people feel part of your team and a part of your organization when you have never met them? And that is something that, like, I don't know if anybody saw, there's been a lot of conversations at the moment in terms of how difficult it is on Zoom and how energy draining it is to meet people and engage people with Zoom. So we were very conscious that we needed to do more than just what we would normally do. So normally people get a career coach and a buddy, but we went to that to the next step. So we made sure that buddies had a lot more information about how to engage with their new joiners. And we also sort of circulated a minimum level as to what each team should be doing with their new joiners as well. So obviously you've got things like the quizzes, you've got the coffee catch-ups, etc. But it's what else can you do to understand a bit more of their personal life? So whether that be giving 3 facts that all of your new joiners had, and one of them's a lie, and then doing it on different levels, because as a new joiner, if you are joining a team that's, say, quite big, of say 20 or 30, that can then feel even more isolating when you're on a Zoom call and you can't see different people's reactions in the room with you. So we then made sure that we were having lots of catch-ups big generally, so people would understand how big the team was and get a feel for it, because that's very difficult when you're at home, but also making sure that there was smaller group meetings so that you could then clarify what you needed, and one-to-ones as well. So we had someone join my team that is a senior associate. She's had regular catch-ups with her manager as well as our wider team, but also with me, and I think that has really helped her, and she's personally said that that's really helped. So I think, just going back to the question of how do you do it initially, no one knew the answer, and I think it was keeping key to communication. How do you then make sure that you're getting the right fit? Again, it's using those other tools that are available to us, whether that be game-based assessments, whether that be the case studies, and relying on the technology that we do have, that we know that we can rely on, and then really thinking through and communicating with people when they do join as to what else do they need, what else are they looking for, in terms of that help, and that training, and making sure it's all accessible to them.
Our recruitment, so we have one person that kind of, we are only about 90 odd people, so you know, significantly smaller than you guys, and I can't even imagine the challenge that you've gone through, but our person that's in charge of recruitment, as it were, has her arms around candidates, you know, from a virtual perspective all the way to the end of their probation. So she actually schedules like weekly check-ins with them however they want it, whether it's text message, email, a Teams call, whatever it is. And you know what, for them, they've then got that singular point of contact where it doesn't feel like they're chopping and changing between people, and they're just like, oh well, fantastic, I don't even remember this person's name, and all of a sudden I'm not in contact with them anymore. It makes a huge difference to have that that consistency, I think, for people, and just pure clarity around where they're going, what do they need to do, because that's all people want.
Especially at the start, when there wasn't any clarity, nobody knew what was going on, but just somebody saying to you, don't worry, we are on this, we know that you're in a pipeline, you are not forgotten about. That was a massive reassurance to people, as opposed to just quiet and darkness. That really helps, even if you're saying, we are working on it, don't worry.
Internationally, we had exactly the same thing. So people operating on different time zones saying, look, I know what your time zone is, therefore we're going to come back to you at this time, your time, and just kind of creating that connection for people really worked for us too.
Okay. And Dan, was there something you wanted to say around this as well? And
yeah, I just think it can, sorry, I can just hear my daughter screaming her head off in the background, which is ironic, isn't it? Yeah,
well planned.
I just, yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I just think it comes down to that communication, as people have said. I think that it would be very easy to not, because there's so much panic and there's so much uncertainty. And I think, as Catherine said, you know, there was a lot of information around what wasn't happening, and just to be able to give that information around what was happening, even if that information is, I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to share that I don't know with you, that is more reassuring than not being seen, not being visible. So yeah, I think from my take on that, it is just to be saying something, even if it is saying nothing, is actually better than doing nothing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
okay. And I suppose probably leads me on to my next question quite nicely. What about those companies that aren't doing so well? I mean, it sounds like you guys have been amazing through this. So what advice would you give companies that aren't doing so well?
Yeah.
How do you?
Yeah, I'll pick up on that one. Yeah, and I think it kind of builds on that communication. I think for companies that aren't doing so well, this might not be very popular, but I'd say start and look within. Why are they not doing so well? How was their communication and management style before this? Because to give some context, for my teams is split across the UK, and also I have virtual teams internationally. So even though we've all predominantly been in an office, it's never been the same office. And so whenever I've spoken to people about who might be a bit more reserved to allowing their teams to work from home or to have that flexible working, when you start to say, well, hang on a minute, you've got a team in London and you've got a team in Noida or in Pune or wherever it might be, is that not the same? Is that just not the same communication styles and the same ways of working? So I think when companies are struggling, firstly, it'd be looking at that communication and management style. And I think as well, you know, with my Barclays hat on, obviously I work in a digital team, so we are quite agile and we're used to that agile way of working. But anyone that's worked within an agile framework knows that agile only works if everything within that team is agile. And when it's not, it doesn't work. So one thing that we found very quickly is that we have, as part of a wider marketing team, we used to have an approvals process that was a once a week, 2.5-hour meeting. And if something went to that approvals process and was not approved, you were then trying to get it into a future slot, and the next week might be full. So then you'd get it 2 weeks down the line. And one of the things that happened very, very quickly is that moved to a half-hour a day approval process. So you could take it on the Monday, you could then get a second round on a Wednesday and get it approved on a Friday. And it was quite funny, because when I started speaking to the wider team and saying, you know, this whole agile thing that I've been going on about, this is it. We're now doing it. And just to see how quickly, you know, work could get put through. So I think there is a piece around actually how teams and organizations manage their workflow, and upon, you know, to build upon that and the kind of communication style I was talking about. One thing that I've never really been a fan of is 9 to 5. And that's because the way that I like to work is very fluid, that I will do work stuff outside of work time, and I will do family stuff inside work time. So I think for me to be able to do that, I've always, instead of looking at 9 to 5 or an arbitrary time period, I've looked at objectives and I've looked at outcomes. And I think when, you know, and I often say that when it comes to the start of the year and you're writing your performance, you know, your development plan for the year and what are your objectives, nobody writes, I'm going to sit at this desk between 9 to 5, because it's not an outcome. It doesn't achieve anything. So when our outcomes are all results driven, cost saving, increased revenue, whatever it might be, then why do, you know, if they're the objectives we're writing, then why do we not create a working framework that allows people to achieve those objectives? So one thing that I've been really clear on is to understand how, given the world that we're living in now, I've got 2 small kids, you know, 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. Sometimes, you know, I just try not to have meetings really before 10 o'clock, because my daughter's often up throughout the night, which means my wife usually takes that hit because she's been on maternity leave. That means when I get up with the kids anywhere from 5:30 to hopefully closer to 7:30, I will keep them for as long as I possibly can so she can recharge. And that means that if I, you know, this morning I had an 8:30 meeting, I'll have my daughter with me. That's absolutely fine. And I think part of my role as a leader within the organization is to not say it's okay, to demonstrate it's okay. Yeah. I will be here with my baby. That doesn't detract from my ability to have a conversation. And I think just the last thing that I'd say on that is, if companies aren't succeeding, communication styles of individuals. So me personally, don't call me out of the blue without any warning, because I could have just had my first 5 minutes to get into some deep thinking. If you call me, it's disrupted. Or I could be trying to put my daughter down, or I could be trying to get my son some lunch. So my preferred communication style is either text message, WhatsApp, instant message, or email. If you send me an instant message saying, I need you to call me urgently, I will do it. But where possible, don't call me out of the blue. Now, other people are the exact opposite. Don't email me, I'll never see it. Just call me, and that's fine. It's understanding what works for those individuals. And then even if that's an Excel sheet that says this person prefers this way, that's absolutely fine, because over time it will become ingrained. And then everyone can just imagine a world where everyone can just perform and be communicated to in a way that suits them. And, you know, I wonder what happens to the productivity of that company.
I love that idea. Yeah. I love that idea of people knowing how others like to communicate, because everyone is so different. And even to the extent of, if you ping someone on our internal chat, I know a lot of people just put hello. I'm like, I want you to say hello and what your question is, because otherwise I won't respond. It's something that's so personal. I love that idea. And I think you've just literally it's come to the crux of the problem. There isn't one answer that suits all organizations. And ultimately it's asking, the first question that you said is, ask yourself very honestly, how do we as an organization need to get ourselves out of this? And if you're struggling, I also think there's no problem going to other people and asking them and asking for advice. So for example, PwC has put up a site now coming up with the common issues that all organizations are facing through COVID, and also our key insights as well. So learning from what other people are doing, but also recognizing that what we have done might be completely wrong for what your organization needs. And it's therefore knowing how your people need to go through that. And it will be a balance. It will be, not everyone will want to go into the offices at the moment, whereas some people we know really do want to go back into the office, and it's how do you strike that balance? And I think that's key. Of balance and communication seem to be the key things that were coming out of this conversation. Really strongly believe that.
I would suggest as well that one of the, I mean, on top of what Dan and Catherine have said there, it's about also sometimes making sure that you've got the sponsorship, the support of the senior leadership, senior teams. It's very difficult. I think it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to manage that up if you don't have the top tier, you know, your leaders in the organisation. And as we said before, not just talking about it, but living and breathing it. If you've got them doing that, it makes it so much easier to then sort of percolate down to the rest of the organisation.
Absolutely.
And again, you know, well, at Surrey County Council, our chief exec who joined a couple of years ago, Joanna Killian, said almost one of the first things that she said when she arrived at the council was, good grief, we need to move towards agile working. She recognised, having come from a large private sector organisation, that what we were doing was stagnant. We were institutionalised almost to a degree in the way in which we were working, just thinking, you know, this is the way we do it. And she started talking about it. She then recruited almost all of her senior management team and made sure that part of the process was around culture, was around leadership, was making sure she was bringing in people who shared, if you like, her thoughts on that. And actually, 3 of the 6 executive directors she brought in, I had conversations with as part of the recruitment process to say, well, actually, I've got young children, and I appreciate it's not just about children. You know, flexible working isn't just about children. But they, all 3 of them said, well, actually, we need to amend our hours to fit in our personal life. And you know, Joanne said straight away, yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, do what you need to. I care about, as Dan mentioned, their output, not how you go about it, you know, how you do it. And of course, what that's meant is over the last couple of years, I mean, from a recruitment perspective, fantastic, because then we're not only, I would have suggested that we were, prior to this, we were creating a shop window on our website in terms of what we want the organisation to be like. But when you go through the shop door, if you go in and you find out it's nothing like you thought it was on the outside, then you're probably just going to run off. No good for retention. But actually, what she allowed us to do, she brought about, you know, change, and that included things like looking at the wording we were using around the organisation, how we were talking, and slowly over time, the recruitment teams had many more evidence-based things that we can display, we can hold up to the market in terms of presenting ourselves. And now I would suggest that we're not now holding up a shop window to what the organisation, it's actually just a window into what the organisation's about. So, you know, giving examples of where we can support flexible working. And the more you scream and shout about it, the more those stubborn managers maybe, and you know, we're still a council, we're not perfect in every single team and place, but the more people who see it, the more people go, well, wait a minute, if this is the way the chief exec's talking about going, then it's what we need to do. I'd suggest that journey was really picking up pace leading up to COVID, but COVID hasn't, you know, in a perverse way, afforded us an opportunity to really bring about step change in the way in which we work. And our chief exec again has been incredibly clear throughout this process that this isn't going to stop. You know, she's not, and as early as at the end of last week, she said, you know, I'm not expecting everyone back in the office on the 14th. The offices will become more open, and you can choose to go back in groups should you wish, but otherwise the preferred way of working for the foreseeable future, if not the future, will be working agilely where you can. And I think now what's happened is those managers, I think there are a lot of managers in the organisation who are happy to do that, the agile working, and take it on board straight away and run away with it. Those ones maybe who were being a little bit more cautious, stubborn in some cases, or just unsure about what it looked like, have now been forced into a position where they've tried it, it works, and it's given them confidence. And this has just brought about a rapid change in the way we work. So I would suggest, in addition to what's been said, that if it's not working at the moment, you need to make sure you've got that sponsorship, that commitment from the senior leaders in the team. And sometimes that might involve actually evidencing to them the benefits that will bring. But as soon as you've got them on side, it makes your job much easier of kind of spreading it out to the rest of the organisation if you don't have that at the moment, of course.
Making sure they're doing it, not just saying it and sending out the comms. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. That has to be living and breathing it, because otherwise it just becomes words. And actually what that does is that just creates more problems than it's worth, because people don't trust you then.
Yeah, and just to really briefly add on, we're talking a lot about flexible working, and for organizations that might be thinking this isn't worked for them, this is not flexible working. This is the least flexible I have ever worked, where I have been mandated to work from my home for 6 months. And so I think that, and with kids, right? So I think that for organizations that go, well, we dabbled with flexible working during COVID and that didn't work. No, this is not flexible working. So I think, giving, as Tom said, it's about choices. The key word in flexible working is that flexibility. And for me, I love being around people. So I would like to be in the office a couple of days a week, but I also love doing the school run and being around at home. So that flexibility means that I can be most productive and the best employee I can be if those needs are met. So for companies that have found this difficult, don't let this be the stopping point. Let it be the starting point.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you, Chloe, Tom, Catherine and Dan. Thank you so much for that. That was brilliant. I think, the main thing to come out of it, that we just need to talk, don't we, and have open conversations with our staff as much as we can. And who knows what the future will hold. But thank you so much for all of your advice and what you've been through. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks.